What started as a whisper in online forums became a movement. What was once dismissed as conspiracy has now taken the world's financial institutions by storm. And what many said would never happen has already begun. The revaluation of the Iraqi dinar is no longer just a theory. It's real, it's confirmed, and it's changing lives, markets, and the way nations deal with power. But how did we get here? How did a nearly worthless note from a war-torn country in 2003 become a centerpiece of global financial rebalancing in 2025? This is the true story of the Iraqi dinar revaluation, its rise from hype to reality, told across 22 years of economic transformation, oil diplomacy, and behind-the-scenes financial warfare. Welcome to Dinar community. If you've been holding dinar, watching the signs, listening to the updates, and hoping for confirmation, this video is for you. Watch closely, because this timeline isn't just a history lesson. It's a playbook for understanding the largest wealth transfer of the modern era. Let's rewind to where it all began. In 2003, Saddam Hussein's regime fell. The invasion of Iraq by US and coalition forces not only ended one of the most tightly controlled governments in the Middle East, it collapsed the country's financial system. Iraq's currency, which had been propped up by propaganda and oil for food arrangements, became virtually worthless overnight. The old Saddam dinar notes were demonetized, and people began using the US dollar on the streets of Baghdad. But something else happened that same year. The Coalition Provisional Authority, alongside Iraq's Interim Governing Council, began circulating a new Iraqi dinar. This version, printed with advanced security features by the renowned De La Rue Company, was issued at a staggering exchange rate, approximately 1,460 Iraqi dinars to one United States dollar. It was barely worth the paper it was printed on. But buried under this economic rubble was Iraq's trump card, oil. Massive, untapped oil reserves. The second largest in the world, in fact. And there were some who began to quietly ask the question, if Iraq rebuilds, if its oil exports return, if it stabilizes, could this currency regain its former strength? And so began the speculation. Between 2004 and 2008, private individuals, especially military contractors, NGO workers, and early currency speculators, began acquiring Iraqi dinar. It was cheap, available, and legal to hold. Currency dealers around the world, particularly in the US, began offering it for purchase. Back then, no one in the mainstream financial world took it seriously. But early dinar holders weren't gambling. They were reading the signs. Iraq's central bank had a plan. The IMF was watching. The oil sector was recovering. And countries like China and Russia were taking quiet interest in Iraq's reconstruction. By 2009, dinar speculation was on fire. Thousands of retail investors were getting in. YouTube videos, forums, newsletters, and conference calls buzzed with intel drops. Some claimed Iraq would return to its pre-Gulf War value, roughly $3 per IQD. Others believed it would peg to a gold-backed system. In 2010, statements from Iraqi officials hinted that removing the 3 zeros was on the table, a move interpreted by many as a precursor to revaluation. The hype reached a fever pitch. But then came the delays. The setbacks. The political games. From 2011 to 2014, Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's administration was plagued by corruption and indecision. The economic reform agenda stalled. The IMF agreements slowed. People started to question if the RV would ever happen at all. Then came ISIS. In 2014, the militant group swept across Iraq and captured Mosul, sending the nation back into chaos. Currency investors feared the worst. But even in that dark hour, the IQD held steady, at around 1,180 to the dollar. Why? Because Iraq's central bank was quietly doing what most didn't notice. Strengthening reserves, modernizing banking systems, laying the groundwork for a financial future that didn't rely on the dollar. In 2017, victory over ISIS was declared. Iraq re-entered oil production at full force. Budget surpluses began to return. The tide had shifted again. By 2018, discussions around Article 8 of the IMF Charter resurfaced. Iraq wanted full currency convertibility, something that only works if your currency is truly valued at its market worth. Then, 2019 came. The Central Bank of Iraq, for the first time, announced steps to digitize its currency and strengthen ties to regional and global financial systems. Speculation was reignited. but this time with a different energy. The fake intel was still out there, but behind the scenes, real banking systems were preparing. Then the world changed. 2020 brought COVID-19. Global markets crashed. Oil prices collapsed. Iraq's economy struggled, but didn't fall apart. The IQD held again. And while the public panicked, Iraq took another step forward, quietly adopting more of the tools needed for a revaluation. Between 2021 and 2023, the term financial reset began entering global discourse. The IMF, World Bank, and even the World Economic Forum began talking openly about de-dollarization, asset-backed currencies, and shifting global reserves. And that's when Iraq began making real moves. In 2023, leaked IMF documents outlined a multi-phase plan to gradually transition Iraq's currency to a new value. Meanwhile, banking insiders across the US, UK, UAE, and Asia began seeing Tier 4A test appointments, quiet, NDA-protected exchanges that were never publicly acknowledged but were absolutely real. The digital banking infrastructure across Iraq went live. The IQD was being positioned for global interoperability. And all roads pointed to one window, mid-2025. Then came the final moves. In early 2024, Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani made it clear, Iraq was ready to reclaim its sovereign financial identity. Oil contracts with China and India were renegotiated, denominated in Dinar. A state-backed digital IQD wallet was launched. The IMF quietly dropped objections to revaluation as Iraq's foreign reserves crossed $100 billion. In November 2024, a test integration of IQD into SWIFT messaging systems was successful. That's when the major banks started making their moves. Chase, Wells Fargo, HSBC, UBS, even banks in Singapore and the UAE began setting up redemption and exchange pathways tied to IQD. And on June 9, 2025, it happened. The Central Bank of Iraq announced to global markets that the IQD had revalued to $6.20 USD. The IMF followed. The BIS confirmed. And just like that, what had been whispered for 22 years became breaking news on financial terminals across the world. Private holders, those in Tier 4B, began receiving appointment instructions. Those who held patiently were offered contract rates as high as $10-15 per IQD depending on volume and usage. Redemption centers across the US and abroad opened. NDAs were signed, exchanges were executed, and a global financial rebalancing began to unfold. The IQD had gone from being ridiculed in 2003 to being central to one of the biggest shifts in wealth distribution in modern history. From being sold for less than a tenth of a penny, to being accepted in high-level trade agreements across Asia and the Middle East. From forums and faith, to fulfillment and financial proof. So where does that leave you? If you're watching this, there are 3 things you must do right now. First, subscribe to this channel. Because while the revaluation has gone live, the real work begins now, managing your exchange, protecting your wealth, and building a legacy. Second, share this video. The truth about the IQD journey matters, and millions still don't understand what just happened. Help get the facts out. And third, comment below. Tell us when you first heard about the dinar. Was it 2009? 2013? Last month? Your story is part of this journey, and it's time to own it. You've witnessed history. You've held the line when most gave up. And now, as the dust settles and the world recalibrates, the question is, what will you do with what comes next? This is Dinar Community. This was the IQD's journey. From hype to history, from fiction to fact, from speculation to reality, and we're just getting started. Like and subscribe for more videos.